The night sky over Normandy was alive with chaos. Parachutes drifted down through tracer fire, black silhouettes cutting across flashes of artillery. Private First Class Daniel Red Harris, a paratrooper with the 101st Airborne, hit the ground hard in a French orchard, mud splattering up his uniform. He gripped the short, stubby weapon slung to his chest, a Thompson M1A1 submachine gun. The wooden stock was slick with sweat. Its curved magazine rattled faintly as he checked his ammo. The .45 caliber rounds, thick, heavy, and brutally powerful, were ready. Somewhere ahead, a farmhouse burned, its orange glow reflecting off the steel receiver of the gun. Red Harris crouched low and thought of something strange. His father had once cursed this weapon. In the 1920 seconds, when Chicago was ruled by men in fedoras and trench coats, the Thompson had been the sound of terror, a mechanical voice that spat death in alleys behind speakeasies. Newspaper headlines screamed about the Tommy gun, the Chicago typewriter, the gun that made the 20s roar. Now, 2 decades later, that same gun was being used to free Europe from tyranny. It was a paradox too perfect for war. How did a weapon once wielded by gangsters and bootleggers become the tool of the American soldier, the liberator of cities, the equalizer in close-quarters combat, the sound of freedom's advance? The answer began not in the crime-ridden streets of Chicago, but in a quiet laboratory, years earlier built by a man who had wanted to save soldiers from the horror of trench warfare. In 1918, the First World War was grinding to its bloody conclusion. Europe was a labyrinth of trenches, barbed wire, and mud. Soldiers fought for yards of ground with rifles that took precious seconds to reload. To storm a trench meant sprinting into machine gun fire and praying you reached the other side alive. Brigadier General John Taliaferro Thompson, a U.S. Army ordnance officer and veteran of earlier campaigns, had seen enough. A man of method and invention, Thompson believed there had to be a better way. A weapon that could unleash continuous fire while still being light enough for a single soldier to carry. He envisioned a trench broom. Working with a group of engineers in a small building on Cleveland Avenue, Thompson developed what would become the first practical submachine gun. It used a unique Blish lock mechanism named after Commander John Blish, which allowed the weapon to handle the powerful .45 ACP cartridge. It could fire up to 800 rounds per minute, nearly 12 bullets every second, from a 50-round drum or 20-round stick magazine. It was compact, deadly, and astonishingly fast. A handheld machine gun decades ahead of its time. By the summer of 1918, prototypes were ready. Thompson secured funding from private investors and partnered with the Auto Ordnance Corporation, a small arms design company in New York. Production plans were drawn. The weapon had a name now, the Thompson submachine gun. But history rarely keeps perfect timing. Before a single shipment could reach France, the armistice was signed. The war was over. Factories slowed, contracts were canceled, and the trench broom designed to clear the German lines suddenly had no trenches to sweep. It was a miracle of engineering that had arrived just a few months too late. Thompson, however, was not a man to give up easily. He saw potential far beyond the battlefield. He believed every police officer, every security guard, every man who stood for order could use his invention. So he marketed it as the anti-bandit gun. Auto Ordnance began production with Colt's Manufacturing Company in Hartford, Connecticut. Only 15,000, Model 1921. Thompsons were built beautiful weapons, hand-fitted with polished walnut grips and precision-machined steel. Each one was a masterpiece. But at $200 apiece, more than a new Ford car at the time, they were far too expensive for most police departments. Sales trickled in. A few went to the U.S. Postal Inspection Service to defend mail trains against robbers. A few to the Marines in Nicaragua. Some to the Irish Republican Army through backdoor deals. And then came the 1,000 920 seconds a decade, that would make the Thompson infamous. The Thompson didn't find its way into the trenches of Europe. It found its way into the back seats of black sedans roaring down Michigan Avenue. By 1921, America had entered a strange new war, not one fought in foreign mud, but on its own streets. The Volstead Act had outlawed alcohol, but where there was law, there was profit. Organized crime was booming. Breweries went underground, liquor flowed through back doors, and men with names like Capone, Moran, and Dillinger became household legends. The Thompson was the perfect weapon for the new battlefield. Compact, portable, and terrifyingly fast. At first, it was marketed to law enforcement. The FBI, the postal inspectors, and even local police departments bought small numbers. But soon, criminals got their hands on them too often from the same distributors. A man with $200 cash could order one by mail. It was said that by 1926, more Thompsons were in the hands of gangsters than police. In Chicago, the gun's rhythm became part of the city's soundtrack. It barked in alleyways, shattered silence behind speakeasies, echoed off brick walls. The press called it the Chicago typewriter because its staccato burst sounded like keys hammering on paper, only the letters it wrote were made of lead. Then came the 14th of February 1929. 7 men, members of Bugs Moran's gang, lined up against a garage wall in North Clark Street. 2 men, dressed as police officers, entered, carrying Thompson submachine guns. Moments later, 70 rounds were fired. When the smoke cleared, the Street Valentine's Day massacre became front-page news, and the Thompson's reputation turned from innovation to infamy. Public outrage exploded. Congress passed the National Firearms Act of 1934, restricting automatic weapons and imposing taxes so heavy that civilian ownership plummeted. The Thompson became a villain in the eyes of America, a symbol of chaos and corruption, of flappers and bullets and bootleg whiskey. Ironically, even as politicians denounced it, the gun's image grew. Hollywood embraced it. Gangster films like Scarface and Public Enemy immortalized the Thompson silhouette. The drum magazine, the forward grip, the brutal chatter of gunfire echoing through the silver screen. The Tommy gun had become an icon, one that terrified parents, fascinated teenagers, and symbolized both the power and danger of American industry. But history was about to give the Thompson a second chance. Across the Atlantic, the world was once again preparing for war. By 1939, the clouds over Europe darkened once again. Hitler's armies had rolled into Poland. France braced for invasion. And Britain, standing alone after the fall of Dunkirk, was desperate. In London, British ordnance officers scoured the world for weapons. Rifles were scarce. Submachine guns were almost non-existent. Then they found the Thompson. Despite its reputation as a gangster's toy, the British saw it for what it truly was, a finely engineered, close-quarters weapon. They placed an urgent order for 500,000 Thompsons from the United States. Overnight, the gun once banned by politicians became a tool of Allied survival. Early shipments, mostly Model 1928A1S, arrived in crates stamped "For His Majesty's Government." British commandos carried them in raids across occupied France and Norway. The Home Guard trained with them, guarding beaches in case of invasion. Even Winston Churchill himself posed for photos holding a Thompson, his cigar clenched between his teeth. The symbolism was undeniable, a weapon once wielded by mobsters, now in the hands of men fighting tyranny. But there was a problem. It was too expensive and too slow to produce for a global war. The original Thompson required intricate machining and hand-fitting, a masterpiece of craftsmanship in an age of mass production. The U.S. Army's Ordnance Department needed something cheaper, faster, and simpler. Engineers at Auto Ordnance and Savage Arms redesigned it. They removed the Blish lock, simplified the receiver, switched from a drum to a stick magazine, and replaced the milled parts with stamped steel. The result was the M1 Thompson, and later, the M1A1, a rugged, soldier-proof version that could be built in a fraction of the time. The M1, A1 fired from an open bolt, weighed about 10.5 pounds, and fired the same, 45 ACP round. It wasn't as sleek as the early models, but it could be churned out by the thousands. When America entered the war in 1941, the Thompson was ready. It became the standard submachine gun of the U.S. Army, Marine Corps, and paratroopers. From the beaches of Guadalcanal to the hedgerows of Normandy, from the jungles of Burma to the ruins of Berlin, the gun once outlawed in its homeland now fought to defend it. For the soldiers who carried it, the Thompson was more than a weapon, it was a lifeline. Lieutenant Jack Nolan of the 82nd Airborne once wrote home, "The Thompson's heavy, but it never quits. When things go bad and the world's on fire, you just pull the trigger, and it feels like it's fighting with you." The gangsters were gone. The stage was different. But the sound, that rapid, mechanical roar, was the same. Only now, it carried the rhythm of liberation. By the time American troops set foot in North Africa in 1942, the Tommy gun had shed its gangster image. Now, in the hands of soldiers covered in dust and sweat, it became something else, a survivor's weapon. In the deserts of Tunisia, Marines and GIs fought in close quarters through narrow alleys and trenches where rifles were too long to swing. The Thompson excelled there. It's heavy. 45 ACP rounds tore through walls, doors, even light armor. It didn't have the range of a Garand, but at 20 yards, it was unmatched. Veterans used to say, "If you could hear the Thompson, you were already too close." When the Marines hit Guadalcanal that same year, the jungle closed in tight. Humidity jammed rifles, mud fouled barrels. But the Thompson, though heavy, kept firing. Its simple blowback action and open bolt design made it rugged in the worst conditions. The wood swelled from moisture, the metal rusted from salt, but it still spat fire when it mattered most. A Marine sergeant named Frank Delaney later recalled, "We used to call it our talking friend. When that thing barked, the whole squad moved." It wasn't elegant, but it saved our skins more times than I can count. Across the globe, British commandos and Canadian infantry used Thompsons during raids and amphibious landings. Even the Soviets, through Lend-Lease shipments, received tens of thousands. Russian soldiers praised its reliability and stopping power, often trading prized goods just to get their hands on one. But nowhere did the Thompson earn its legend like in Europe. On the 6th of June 1944, as paratroopers dropped over Normandy, thousands of M1A1 Thompsons were packed in their jump kits. Short, compact, and devastating in a farmhouse or hedgerow, the gun became a staple of the airborne assault. Private James Keegan, 502nd Parachute Infantry, wrote in his diary, "When I hit the ground, I didn't think about home or God. I thought about my Thompson. I checked it, loaded it, and prayed it wouldn't jam." That was the only prayer that made sense. As the Allies pushed through France, Belgium, and into Germany, the Thompson went everywhere. It was carried in jeeps, slung over shoulders, strapped to tanks, and buried in mud. It saw house-to-house fighting in Aachen, hedgerow ambushes in Normandy, and desperate urban battles across the Rhine. It was the gun of the front line, brutal, loud, and utterly American. Its only flaw was its weight. At nearly 11 pounds loaded, the Thompson was heavy, and ammunition ran out fast. A soldier could burn through a 30-round magazine in under 3 seconds. Yet in those moments of close-quarter chaos, a dark stairwell, a barn, a trench corner, it was a godsend. When the shooting started, the Thompson wasn't just a tool. It was reassurance, the one voice in the storm that didn't waver. It had been born too late for one war. But in this one, it had finally found its place. By 1944, the Thompson wasn't just a gun, it was a symbol. It appeared in U.S. Army propaganda posters, in training films, in newsreels showing GIs advancing through Europe and the Pacific. The sleek outline of its receiver, the curve of its magazine, the roar of its burst all became the unmistakable image of American power in motion. In villages across France, civilians watched as paratroopers marched through the streets, with Thompsons slung over their shoulders, the stars and stripes stitched to their sleeves. To them, the sound of that weapon meant liberation. To the Germans, it meant trouble. Reports from Wehrmacht units described heavy American automatic fire at close range, especially in urban combat. Some even mistook the Thompson for a light machine gun because of its intensity. Comparatively, German soldiers relied on the MP-40, a 9mm submachine gun that was lighter and easier to carry, but it lacked the sheer punch of the .45 ACP round. Japanese troops fielded the Type 100, but it was scarce and mechanically unreliable. In contrast, the Thompson could chew through doors, helmets, and walls with terrifying ease. 1U. Paratrooper famously said, "You could hit a German in the chest with a Thompson, and he stayed down. You hit him with anything smaller, and he might get back up." By 1943, production was in full swing. Over 1.5 million Thompsons rolled out of American factories from Bridgeport, Connecticut, to Utica, New York. The same industrial spirit that built Ford trucks and Liberty ships now turned out thousands of submachine guns a day, and each one carried a story. Some were dropped behind enemy lines with the French resistance. Others guarded supply convoys in Italy. Many were handed to medics, engineers, and tank crews, men who needed something fast and reliable when the front found them. But perhaps what made the Thompson iconic wasn't just its mechanical design, it was its personality. Soldiers named their Thompsons. They carved initials into the stocks, painted pinup girls on the sides, wrapped the grips in tape. The weapon became personal. It wasn't just government-issued steel, it was theirs. To the men who carried it, the Thompson had soul. Even General Eisenhower was photographed holding one during inspections, smiling faintly as he balanced its weight. And when victory came in 1945, the Thompson was there too, in the rubble of Berlin, in the streets of Manila, in the Pacific jungles turned silent. From the jungles to the cathedrals of Europe, from the sand of Tarawa to the snow of Bastogne, one weapon had stood by the American soldier through it all. It had been the gun of both sinner and savior, and the world would never look at it the same way again. When the war ended in 1945, the Thompson returned home, but it came back changed. The same weapon that had once terrified mobsters, conquered battlefields, and liberated nations now faced a quieter enemy: obsolescence. New designs were lighter, cheaper, and simpler to produce. The M3, grease gun, stamped from sheet metal and costing less than $20 to build, began replacing the $45 Thompson in late 1944. The grease gun lacked polish, its sights were crude, its trigger stiff, but it worked. It was the future. Utilitarian, disposable, efficient. In peacetime America, the Thompson's roar faded into memory. The U.S. Army stored thousands in depots and armories. Others were given to allies under post-war aid programs. British and French colonial troops carried them in Indochina, Malaya, and North Africa. Some found their way into the jungles of Vietnam long before the U.S. ever returned there. But the Thompson refused to disappear completely. In 1947, as the Cold War began, American soldiers still trained with them in Korea. The weapon that had fought bootleggers and Nazis now fired at communists across frozen ridgelines. Photographs from Incheon and Pusan show Marines clutching their Thompsons in the mud, the same stance their fathers had taken in Normandy. It was no longer a symbol of innovation, but it was still a symbol of trust. And yet, by the 1,950 seconds, the world around it had changed beyond recognition. Television showed gleaming jets, nuclear submarines, missiles streaking toward the stratosphere. The Thompson, with its walnut stock and drum magazine, looked like a relic from another century, too heavy, too human, too analog for the atomic age. The FBI replaced it with the M2 carbine. The Army retired it officially in 1957. Most were scrapped for parts or sent overseas, vanishing into history's warehouses. But in the American imagination, in film, music, and memory, the Thompson refused to die. Hollywood rediscovered it first. Gangster films of the 1,000, 950 seconds, and 60 seconds resurrected the silhouette of the gun that roared. Humphrey Bogart, James Cagney, and later, Al Pacino in Scarface, made it a symbol again, not of crime or war, but of power itself. Even as the M16 replaced it in Vietnam, the Thompson still appeared in training manuals and parade photographs, its wooden stock gleaming under the sun, like an artifact from a more tangible era of war. By then, the weapon had transcended its purpose. It had become a piece of mythology forged in fire, baptized in blood, and immortalized in reel after reel of history's greatest dramas. The Thompson story is the story of America itself. Innovation born from chaos, redefined by necessity, and immortalized through contradiction. It began as a dream of ending trench warfare, a weapon designed to prevent slaughter. Instead, it found its place among gangsters and soldiers, bringing both terror and liberation. It was a tool of law and lawlessness, of heroes and villains, of democracy and destruction. In every era it touched, it revealed something about the hands that held it. In the 1,920 seconds, it spoke of desperation of a nation reeling from prohibition and greed. In the 1,940 seconds, it spoke of unity, a factory worker's dream turned into the soldier's salvation. And after the guns went silent, it became a whisper of nostalgia, a reminder of when the world's fate could still be decided by courage and craftsmanship. General Eisenhower once said that America's strength was not just its factories or weapons, but the ingenuity of free men working toward a common goal. The Thompson embodied that. It was built not just by engineers and generals, but by machinists in Bridgeport, by riveters in Chicago, by young men who believed their work could change history, and it did. By war's end, more than 1.7 million Thompsons had been built. That's 1.7 million links in a chain that connected the factory floor to the foxhole, the home front to the front line. And though it eventually fell silent, its echoes shaped everything that came after, from the compact submachine guns of the Cold War to the close-quarters doctrines of modern warfare. Every soldier who carried a weapon that fired fast, hit hard, and fit in his hands owed something to the Thompson. Today, you can still hear its rattle in the archives of black and white film and the grainy footage of Normandy, the alleys of Sicily, the docks of Guadalcanal. You can still see it hanging on the walls of museums, its wood darkened by age but still smooth where a soldier's hand once gripped it tight. It's more than a machine. It's a conversation across time between invention and consequence, between freedom and fear. Because in the end, the Thompson wasn't just America's machine gun, it was America's reflection. A weapon that began with one man's dream to end war and became one of history's most enduring symbols of how war, once born, shapes everything it touches. The Tommy gun roared through a century, from Chicago's streets to Europe's trenches, from the jungles of the Pacific to the frozen hills of Korea, and in every echo, you can still hear the sound of a nation growing up through the noise. The world may have moved on, but that sound, that rapid, thunderous BRRRP, still carries the same truth it did 8 decades ago. Power, once unleashed, never really goes quiet.